Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, or I should say, Compass Points After Dark, because we are taping on Thursday evening. If those of you who are watching on YouTube can see Seth Barber, our producer's got a nice nighttime skyline of Knoxville there to kind of set the mood. Got a very nice rum, 18-year-old rum that Seth has provided here. So thanks, Seth. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
We are here to talk about Knoxville news, politics, government, business, events, education, anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com. I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing fine. It's past my bedtime. But,
yeah, I know.
I'm trying to, I had some coffee earlier. Hopefully I won't nod off during the middle
Well,
of this.
look, given that usually if we are working this late for Compass, we're sitting like in the main assembly room of the city-county building at a late city council meeting or county commission meeting, where among other things, they do not have 18-year-old rum. Although I would recommend that as if anybody's looking for suggestions on how to improve those long meetings. Maybe if a meeting passes a certain point, that should be like, okay, we're going to break out the bottles here, something.
Yeah. It would help.
We do have some things to talk about this week. Actually, not a whole lot to talk about with either the city or county specifically, because they just didn't have a lot going on this week, but a lot of education news this week we're going to be talking about. We are also going to be talking about a move by Governor Bill Lee to restrict federal funding for HIV prevention and the local impact that that's going to have. And we'll also have an interview about that with Steve Jenkins of Positively Living, local nonprofit that provides exactly those services. Knox County Schools received their first formal official charter school application in about a decade this week. We'll talk about that. University of Tennessee. Last week we were talking about University of Tennessee's sort of expanding student population and all the applications that they were getting. This week we're going to talk about their physical expansion.
Yes.
They are looking at, their footprint is already pretty large in Knoxville, and they're looking at making it bigger. But we are going to start off with yet another education-related story that connects to both the school system and the university system and all of our local universities, which is that Monday of this past week, a real who's who of the local educational government industrial complex got together along with representatives from the business community. So we had Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs was there, Knox County School Superintendent John Ryswick. We had representatives from the University of Tennessee, Pellissippi State, Knoxville Chamber. Like I said, really everybody in this
all the
kind
education stakeholders.
Yeah, all of these people in sort of the broad education realm got together out at Pellissippi State and announced, and this was all organized, I should say, by Tennessee Achieves, which is the Knoxville-based nonprofit that provides mentoring services through the Tennessee Promise Scholarship Program statewide. But they kind of pulled this together just as a Knox County event to say that Knox County is setting a goal of having 70% of all high school graduates enroll in college basically, by the time they graduate, already have a plan and an acceptance someplace that they're planning to go that fall. 70%. So a couple of things about this. One is that it would be a decent-sized leap. And if you look, one thing they presented at this event was sort of the past 8 or 9 years worth of data. And for most of the 2010s, that percentage hovered in the sort of mid-60s. The highest point that it has hit yet was in 2015, which was the first year of that Tennessee Promise program. So there was a lot of hype about it, saying anybody who wants to go to community college can go for free, because that's what Tennessee well, it pays the tuition. It doesn't pay your fees, but pays tuition, big part of the cost for going to community college, as long as you maintain a certain GPA and you have to do 8 hours of community service a semester. So the first year that was available, Knox County actually had 67%, right at 2/3 of all high school graduates be enrolled in college for that fall. It's a pretty high number. It fell off a little bit since then. It was kind of bouncing around 62, 63%, and then COVID hit. And as we all know, COVID disrupted lots of things, and this trajectory was one of the things that got disrupted. And in 2021, that number fell to 59.5%, which was the lowest number in a decade by far. So they want to boost that from 59.5% up to 70%, and they want to do this by 2024. And
Okay.
can you remind me what year it is right now?
It is 2023.
2023. I'm still having trouble remembering that on checks and so forth, but
So this is a year from now.
It is 2023. 2024 is only a year away. That means this year's juniors, next year's seniors. They want to have 70% of them enrolled in college.
I have
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
question. Does now the enrollment, the 70% enrollment in college, also does that include the colleges of applied technology?
Yes, and that's
Okay.
one point they said. Chrissy D'Alejandro, who's the executive director of Tennessee Achieves, said that we're putting a big tent around the word college. And by college, what they mean is a 4-year school, of course, a 2-year school like Pellissippi State, College of the South, but also TCAT, the technical schools, a professional training or licensure program. You know, you're going to go become an electrician or whatever. Any of these kinds of programs that provide training so that students at the end of them will have good career prospects, basically, because that's really what this is all about, of course, is building the local workforce. Micah Odom from the Knoxville Chamber was there to kind of throw their support behind this and say that, you know, and this is something that we've heard a lot, of course, really over the last 20 years, is that the old model where, you know, at high school graduation, some percentage, usually a minority of students would go off to college and kind of everybody else would go out and get a job. That doesn't work as well anymore for sort of, you know, having a sustainable career and income, because the kinds of jobs, yes, you can go out and get a job with nothing more than a high school. That you can get a job with less than a high school degree, in fact. But a lot of those jobs don't pay very much and don't put you on a clear, you know, sort of career trajectory toward eventually making more money. And so that's the real goal here. And to also create that kind of skilled workforce that they say employers are looking for. And so, you know, this event, of course, comes on the heels of the week before. The school system rolled out its 865 academies with a lot of ballyhoo, and a lot of the same people at that event. Sort of all these same people are showing up at all these events. But I think that, you know, on the one hand, announcing this as a goal is really just that. There was no extra programming to it. There was no extra funding. It was really kind of everybody involved saying, well, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, except harder. We're going to, especially over this next year, we're really going to talk to those kids who are graduating. We're really going to encourage, and starting with them, obviously, this year as juniors, encourage them to, like, let's make those plans. What are you planning to do? What are you thinking about? And Ryswick, the school superintendent, said that, you know, yes, you announce this goal, and if in 2024 that number is not 70%, but it's 65%, well, that would be a lot higher than the 59% it was in 2021.
Right.
And of course, you know, this is sort of like a sprint goal, as they said, and the larger goals that they're talking about are more marathon goals, but this is a way to just kind of try to get everybody energized and focused and jumpstart a lot of those shifts and changes that Ryswick and others have talked about. So that was that. We will. The nice thing for us as reporters about this kind of goal is it's very specific. And so, a year from now or a year plus from now, we'll be able to come back to the school system and say, okay, what would you said?
What's your
70,
percentage?
Where was that actual number?
And why didn't you make it?
Right.
Well, I mean, I'm being a cynic on that.
And in between, of course, we'll have this year's graduates, and so we'll get to see what that number is. Does that number come up from that 59%? Was that kind of like a particularly low number because of everything going on around the pandemic? We will find out all of that. So students who do go on to college,
right,
who do enroll in, say, the University of Tennessee's Knoxville campus, would be coming to a campus that has already seen a lot of changes in recent years. They've done a lot of work there. They have a lot of plans for the near and longer term future. And this week, we had some coverage of their sort of big picture plans for their own physical footprint. What was that?
Yeah, one of the things, there's the UT campus footprint, which is the property that UT owns, where they have dorms, classrooms, offices, those things. I hear there's a football stadium there too.
Somewhere in there.
But under in the state of Tennessee, if a public school wants to expand, UT has to get permission from the Board of Trustees to add specific pieces of property to its to create a growth boundary. Where they can buy property within that area.
Because they need permission from the state to buy property.
Yes.
They're a state agency.
Right. And so what they have now, they have a boundary now, which is the campus, plus a corridor basically up Concord Street to I-40, just beyond Sutherland Avenue. A lot of that property is actually within their growth boundary. They don't own it. The university doesn't own it, but it'll be, if they want to buy it, it goes a lot faster.
And they do have some property up there. They have maintenance and storage or something there off of Sutherland.
Yes, they do. And so, and they also now have a little bit on Blunt Avenue in South Knoxville, on the South Knoxville waterfront, in anticipation of that pedestrian bridge we've talked about. Well, what they decided to do, and this still needs to be approved by the Board of Trustees, is they're going to set a new growth boundary, but instead of kind of doing it piecemeal like that, they just took a point on campus and then drew a 1.5 mile radius circle around it.
So that's a circle, a 3 mile in
diameter 3 mile diameter circle, and all of the property in there is going to be within the growth boundary. Now, this is, and this it's a huge part of Knoxville. There's most of downtown, much of the South Knoxville waterfront, and South Knoxville in general. He goes to the west. He goes almost to, or about to Cherokee Boulevard. And then it goes, into Marble City. We talked about Mechanicsville, and also includes all of Fort Sanders. Now, when you say UT could possibly expand into Fort Sanders, you get a lot of people in town who get a little nervous, and understandably so. Most of the historic housing stock, or a lot of the historic housing stock, is gone now between the university and the hospitals and
private developers,
private apartment developers.
But UT itself has picked and chosen properties over the years.
Now, one thing is, in the master plan, this is all part of a 10-year master plan for the campus. And in that, it specifically states that UT is not interested in buying any of the historic housing stock in Fort Sanders or in the little Maplehurst enclave over behind Church Street Baptist Church or Methodist Church. So, but anyway, and they're saying, this doesn't mean we're going to be buying up all these properties. But if they, for example, want to go buy more property in South Knoxville than is already in their footprint, then they'd be able to do that.
Right. Anything that's within that radius.
Right.
And of course, as a state agency, they have eminent domain. And so if
Yeah.
they decide they want a property, you can't refuse to sell to them.
Yeah.
They're required to they have to do it at market rate, and you can get into negotiations about that and everything. But basically, if they define this 3-mile diameter, any property in there, they could just come and say, you know what, we want this to be
gonna take
XYZ,
it, yeah.
right?
Well, here's our offer. If you don't take it, we're going to start, eminent domain proceedings. That is a possibility. Another thing that they've talked about, and they've been talking with city officials about this too, is property buildings downtown, and for various uses. And of course, they already have they already have the conference center, which is there on Henley Street, and a big presence there.
Yeah, and they have a couple of other offices. They have the downtown gallery on the 100 block of Gay Street.
So I mean, but this would, if they decide they want to buy the, let's say they decide they want to buy the Medical Arts Building, which is near, down an area of downtown near campus, and beautiful building, and they could use it for various things. It could be residence or whatever. But if they wanted to buy that, they go to the owner and say, "Here's our offer," and they could buy it.
Right.
And it would be without waiting to go to the Board of Trustees, because as it stands now, they would have to wait until the Board of Trustees meets twice a year in voting meetings, and they would have to wait until the next.
And I think the
meeting.
State Building Commission too
And
gets
the
involved.
State Building
right?
Commission's involved too, but the State Building Commission meets much more frequently than
Right.
twice a year. So it would expedite the process.
Well, and of course, the other possible effect here, when we think about like our local governments, is that any property the University of Tennessee buys comes off the tax rolls. And so
That
if
is
they
true.
buy any privately owned piece of property that right now is paying city and county property taxes, of course, once that becomes state property, it no longer is contributing any property taxes. So there's lots of, now I know that they say that they're just because they define this whole area doesn't mean they're envisioning literally taking everything.
Oh, they're not.
within it.
There's no way they could take all of it. It's just. I mean, I didn't do a square mileage analysis of it, but it more than doubles it's more than twice the size of the current campus. And
It's more about giving them flexibility, basically.
right. If they've got a building in Mechanicsville, and if they want to add to their holdings in Mechanicsville, this would enable them to do that in a much more efficient way.
Right.
And as we mentioned, downtown, South Waterfront, all these areas where, if they decide that fits with what they're doing, and they can just go ahead and do it.
And this all is connected to their broader growth plans, right?
Right.
They're talking about eventually having, well, not eventually, like maybe by the end of the decade, having 38,000 students at the Knoxville campus.
38,000 in-person students. That doesn't include online students.
Which is a big jump from where they are.
Yeah. Compared to 2021, which is they had about 30,000, so it's going up 8,000.
Yeah. It's more than a 25%
Yeah,
jump.
it's a big jump, and these are undergrad and graduate students. And part of the master plan is building the infrastructure to house and educate these students. They've been kind of lax on building new housing. We talked about some housing that was last week that they're going to be building in a public-private partnership, and that's a buzzword that everybody needs to get used to hearing when it comes to UT.
Well, and
projects.
maybe government in general. Obviously, Governor Lee's talking about it with his transportation
Right.
plan.
but also not just housing. You got research space. You got classroom space. You need office space, and they talked about finally having the need to have a building that would be swing space, which is where if they're going to be renovating a building that houses a couple of academic departments, those departments could relocate into the swing space while that's happening, and then move back. And then and of course, doing something like that requires a lot of planning on which buildings get renovated where. But renovations, new construction, all over the place. If you think that UT has been a construction site with a college attached to it for the past decade, it's going to be just as busy the next decade.
Right. All right. Well, we will and like you say, that is going to come up for a vote at the Board of Trustees this month.
The Board of Trustees is meeting at the end of February, and we'll be there and bring everybody the news. Who knows? They may decide to make it a 2-mile radius circle.
Wow.
Who knows? I don't know.
Go big.
But probably not.
Right.
This
the 1.5, right, was particularly set so they could take in all of the research park there at Cherokee Farms.
Well, there are Cherokee Farms, and there's also they own quite a bit of property on the other side of Cherokee Trail from UT Hospital. Of course, that's where the Body Farm is, and
right.
all that stuff. They own quite a bit of property there. So this they actually centered the circle on the western end of the existing campus, not on the hill or not in the middle of campus, but on the western end, so they could encompass all of that within the 1.5 square mile radius, and it does pick up as much of South Knoxville and downtown as you would think that they would need or want.
Right.
And so.
Okay. Well, certainly more to come there. Knox County Schools received a charter school application this week. This is the first time this has happened. As I said earlier, in nearly a decade, we only have one charter school in Knoxville. It is Emerald Academy, and that began operations in, I want to say, 2014, 15. Have to go back and double check, but around there. And so the school system has not had any other applicants since then, but of course with Governor Lee making a big push and providing resources also for charter schools, it's not surprising that we're starting to see some more interest. Actually, initially there were 2 different schools that submitted letters of intent to the school system back in November saying that they were planning to apply. One of them ultimately withdrew their letter of intent, and that was a group calling themselves the Lifelong Learning Collective, who were planning to open a school that was going to be heavily based on teaching students philosophy and critical thinking. Sounded kind of interesting.
Yes.
But they withdrew their application. I think. Well, I don't actually know why. I do know that the application process itself is fairly rigorous. It asks for a lot of details. It also costs some money to file those applications. All of that may have prevented them. However, one school did apply, and this is the Knoxville Preparatory School, or Knoxville Prep, which is based on a school, an existing school in Chattanooga Prep, and it's the same group. They're called Prep Public Schools. It's a nonprofit because in Tennessee, only nonprofits can open charter schools. They are planning to open a school here. It is going to be an all-boys academy that teaches grades 6 through 12. And they put out a press release this week saying that both they had filed their formal application, which will now be reviewed by a school district evaluation team that will make a recommendation to the school board, which will probably vote on it, I think, in April. However, both that team and the school board are really pretty constrained. The state law spells out the criteria they have to use, and the state law is written to be pretty friendly to charter schools because we have a legislature and a governor who are pretty friendly to charter schools. And so you can't, school boards can't just say, we don't like charter schools, we're not going to grant you a charter. If the application meets all of the standards that the state requires, they're pretty well obligated to grant it. And since this is a school that already operates, a team that already operates a school, excuse me, in Chattanooga, they presumably know how the system works, and you would think that if they were able to get a school approved in Chattanooga, probably they will here. But we'll see. Every situation's different. They did it. One of the requirements is they have to have a place to be, and they haven't found what they say is a permanent home yet. But they have an agreement with the Boys and Girls Club for their facility in North Knoxville on Irwin Street, just off of Broadway. Which I guess they have some, Boys and Girls Club has some extra space in. So the first year's class, which is only going to be a 6th grade class, they're basically going to be adding, year by year as they go. They will start there. It's possible that will be where they'll stay. I asked, and they said it all kind of remains to be seen what their needs are and how much space is potentially available there and so forth. But that is where they intend to start. So that application is in. And it will probably be before the school board within a couple of months, and we will talk about it more then. However, in the meantime, you can find on our website an interview with Brad Scott, who's the CEO of Prep Public Schools, talking about their school in Chattanooga and what their plans are for Knoxville.
Yeah, and one thing about the Boys and Girls Club is you go, okay, well, are they displacing the Boys and Girls Club? But you got to remember that during a school year, the Boys and Girls Club is pretty much empty during the day. So during the school hours, and so to the Boys and Girls Club, I would imagine that would be a beneficial use for their.
Yeah, there's definitely some logic to it, because you're right. Yeah. Boys and Girls Club is primarily like an after school, and also on sometimes vacations and things like that. Yeah. They'll offer programming. But yeah, I don't know the details of exactly how much space they're going to use there or how much space the club has available, and I guess those are all things that they will work out, but presumably we will be hearing more. All right, let's talk now about this whole issue of HIV funding, and this started with Governor Lee's administration coming out and saying that they were going to stop accepting federal funding for HIV testing and prevention. So, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a really unusual decision. The state has been accepting this funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for 15 years, and it's millions of dollars. And what it is it's pass-through money that goes primarily to the nonprofit organizations, about 15 nonprofit organizations.
And this comes from the Centers for Disease Control, right?
Right. Yes, the CDC, and the it goes to the money goes to these nonprofits that actually do the work, and they do. And this is prevention only work, and so it's things like needle sharing and screening, testing, and
by needle sharing, you mean like needle exchange programs
where
they
exchange,
give clean needles to people who are active drug users?
IV drug users who, and one of the things is that under the current CDC guidelines, these programs are supposed to focus on the three groups that are the most risk of contracting HIV. It's men who have sex with men, transgender individuals, and also IV drug users. And so this is, and of course we have this huge opioid problem, and so that's been growing. And when you look at the statistics, the people who are most likely to, by far, most likely to contract HIV are men who have sex with men and people who use IV drugs. What the state now is going to do is the Lee's administration said, end of May, these contracts are done. We're not taking any more money. These contracts end. The state's going to take over as it be state funded. So instead of the federal government funding it, the state taxpayers are going to be funding it.
And why is the state doing this? Is it because they think that these programs don't work, that the money's not being spent well, that they're not serving the right populations? Why is the state doing this?
A little bit of they're not serving the right populations, even though it's demonstrably proven that the populations that they serve are the ones most at risk. And this is only one part. I'll get to the second part in a minute. But the state has said that they're going to switch the focus to first responders, who ever since universal precautions became mandatory, 20, 30 years ago, really aren't. They're more at risk than the average person, but
very few actual cases of transmission.
Very few. Yeah. But they're going to be first responders, victims of human trafficking, and women who are pregnant who could possibly pass HIV on to their
especially drug-using women.
Drug-using women. So there's a little bit of overlap there with the IV drug people, but conspicuously absent are men who have sex with men and IV drug users.
The two most at-risk populations.
And so that's an issue. But the other thing is why they're doing it, and it appears that a big reason that they're doing this is not who's getting the services, but who's providing the services. One of the organizations that is a big player in this is Planned Parenthood, and and Planned Parenthood is not, is kind of a punching bag for a lot of people on the conservative world,
because they provide abortion services some places, but of course not in Tennessee
here,
anymore.
But of course they still advocate for them, and one of the issues here was they wanted to cut ties with Planned Parenthood with this program.
Just cut them out of the program.
Just cut them out of the program. Keep the program, but just tell Planned Parenthood to go away. Well, they can't do that. In fact, the Haslam administration tried doing that, and there's a federal court order that basically a federal judge said you can't punish an organization for them exercising their First Amendment rights. And so they couldn't just get rid of Planned Parenthood, so they got rid of everybody. And so now one of the issues excuse me, is what's going to replace it? Is one of this is I think it is this is the prevention part. Of course, there's also the treatment part for people who are positive, and that is by far the most, like we talked about positively living there, and we're going to have Steve Jenkins, their CEO, on in just a few minutes to go into a little bit more detail on this. But about 90% of their work is treatment,
right?
And trying to get people to where their viral load is so low that they can't transmit it again, and things like that, and extend their lives. But they won't know who those people are if they can't test them and treat them. But the state apparently is going to be, in some shape, form, or fashion, continuing the program. But they haven't said how. And that uncertainty and that lack of I don't know if it's lack of candor or just lack of detail about
lack of clarity. I think we can say,
yeah, for sure. And that gets everybody. I mean, I talked to the people at the health department here, and they don't know what it means. They're in the dark. I talk to legislators. They don't know what's happening. They're in the dark.
Right, because this really was within the administration this decision was made.
This was a decision that was made by the administration, and so as it stands now, all these contracts are going to end at the end of May and the beginning of June. There'll be a new program in place funded with state taxpayer dollars instead of federal dollars.
But obviously there's concern, like some of these things, you talk about harm reduction, needle exchanges have been very politically controversial in a lot of places. And it's one thing to have that being funded by the CDC, the federal government, and, one wonders, will the state have the same kind of appetite to, be funding the distribution of clean needles and that kind of thing?
Yeah, because there are people who think that by doing that, the state would be encouraging drug use. That's most of the the organizations that do that say no. It's they're going to use drugs one way or the other. While we're doing is trying to keep them from contracting HIV or hepatitis C. So, one of the a couple of things. One is that people may go undiagnosed longer, depending on how this program is set up. It's so wishy-washy, but and currently about 14% of Tennesseans who are HIV positive don't realize it. So it's a rule of thumb there. And then what it could do is if it does lead to if more IV drug users contract HIV because they're using dirty needles, and they used to be in an exchange program, they're not anymore. They share needles, they get HIV. Then you're going to increase the amount of care and cost of care. It costs about $500,000 to treat someone over the course of their lifetime who has HIV.
Right, because once somebody's infected, it's a lifetime of treatment.
It's a lifetime.
We have good treatment, but we don't have a cure.
Right, and so that's that uncertainty and the lack of clarity is really got a lot of people across the state concerned about what the future holds. And to speak to that is Steve Jenkins, who is the CEO of Positively Living. They have a healthcare arm of that organization that does this preventive care, and they also do treatment. And Steve sat down and talked with us about what his understanding is of what's going on, and our interview with him is coming up right now. Hi, this week's guest for our Compass Points podcast is Steve Jenkins. He is the head of Positively Living, which is an organization that provides assistance to people in our community who are HIV positive, and prevention care for people who are at risk of contracting HIV. So, Steve, I hope I characterized your work concisely and correctly, but correct me if I'm wrong. Welcome, and
thank you.
And talk a little bit about what you guys do.
Yeah, you summed it up really well. We are at our core an AIDS service organization. So our mission has been for the past 25 odd years to serve people that are at high risk of contracting HIV and those that are living with HIV. We have offices in across Tennessee, Knoxville, Chattanooga, Cookeville, all the way over in Memphis. So we serve a wide variety of communities. I will add, as a service component, we do primary care, HIV care, infectious disease care for hepatitis C. We do PrEP and prevention services. We also do a lot of harm reduction services in East Tennessee, meaning syringe exchange and other harm reduction components.
Okay, and one of the, of course, one of the reasons we're talking with you is Governor Bill Lee has announced that the state is not going to accept funding from the CDC, federal funding for some HIV prevention measures, and this funding goes to your organization. What how much of this? How much funding do you get through this program, and what is your understanding of what this means to the Choice Health organization?
Right. I wish that was an easy answer. Unfortunately, the answer is really quite complex because we are impacted. Positively Living Choice Health Network. There are, I think, 15 other agencies across the state that are also impacted. So I'll kind of start with what the impact is for us at Positively Living, but then I want to talk about the global impact here, statewide being global, that there is a bigger issue at hand with how this sort of plays out in our communities. I mean, for us at Positively Living, we get about $100,000 of that CDC money, which is often referenced in this context, which goes to prevention, navigation to PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is HIV meds that keep you from catching HIV. There's some trainings in there, what we call evidence-based interventions that target really high-risk communities. So that's that pool of money. We also get about $300,000 that goes towards our harm reduction programs. Now, I want to say we're really unclear because there's not a lot of detail regarding the governor's plans of what is impacted, what goes away, what's funded with new state dollars. So I'm saying that all those have a potential impact if this plays out, that all funds related to CDC will be cut. Now, the other issue for us at Positively Living, and I think, Scott, you and I talked about this previously, is the grant dollar amount is one thing, and the grant dollar amount again for us is a couple $100,000, but we also through our being able to leverage that money through the free 340B program, which is basically a pharmacy program, allows us to generate another $500,000 that then we roll back into providing care for those marginalized communities. So it's, the dollar amount doesn't seem very big, but when you really look at the ripple effect, the dollars that we lose because we no longer can leverage those and will be ineligible to receive those additional funds because those grants are not received by the state, creates a much bigger financial hole in our community. But I want to talk on a statewide basis. I think what's lost in this conversation is, I've heard people sort of suggest back to me that, look, he's going to replace the money. We're just going to keep doing our thing. And that's not how it works. These dollars that have come from the CDC have come for a long time, have come with targeted strategies. They don't just come and say, hey, find out some way to spend this. They come with a coordinated, direct effort that is defined for each unique community. The needs of Knoxville are much different than the needs of Memphis, right? And so the CDC has allowed us and directed us through some evidence-based interventions to create these models that have proven themselves very impactful over time. They target those most at risk. Science is driving this effort, not politics, and it's been driving this effort for a long time. So it's really, this misconception that you can just pluck money out, pluck a pool of money back in and do sort of similar work and still be impactful. It just doesn't play out when you look at how to practice medicine and public health. And that's unfortunate because I think when you just look at the dollar signs, it confuses the real public health impact, which is going to play out. Now, we talked about, the various services that are impacted. Harm reduction is one that's unique in that only certain cities have it across the state. We have the program that covers Knox and most of East Tennessee. We serve several thousand people a year, upwards of 3,000 people a year. The highest risk community the highest risk persons in our community for contracting HIV. And I'll give you an example. Positivity rates amongst high risk groups. Okay, so if you're testing, let's say, men that have sex with men, you're looking for a 1% positivity rate, and that's considered success. In the needle sharing community, we're looking at rates in the 4 to 5% range for our community. So it's exponential. This is removing dollars at its most simple form. It is creating a potentially devastating health crisis at its worst.
So I wanted to ask about, well, two things really. First of all, did you all have any, I guess, warning about this? Did anybody from the state come and ask, hey, we're going to make changes to this. How will it affect you? Were there any of those conversations before this announcement was made? And then the second question is, you talked about these programs being driven by science rather than politics. This decision appears to be kind of the opposite, in the sense that it doesn't really seem to have anything to do with HIV treatment or some sense that these programs aren't working or anything like that. It's really just because basically the state wants to avoid giving any money to Planned Parenthood for any reason at all because of a completely separate issue, abortion. And so just your thoughts on sort of Positively Living and the people who you serve being caught up in what appears to be kind of like collateral from the political, a completely separate political battle.
Yeah. Look, I'll say this. The Department of Health, and I mean the people that are doctors, MPHs that have been doing this work for a long time, have always been supportive and understand the science, understand how to use those dollars effectively. And in most conversations with them, they are equally surprised by the change as providers are. We received real notice. Most of the providers got a call in one single day that said, we're gonna deny these dollars. We don't have a plan yet. There's been no defined plan. The few conversations we've had with the Department of Health, they don't have a plan. They don't understand what the plan looks like. Sort of the promise has been, again, that they're going to replace those federal dollars with true state dollars, which presents its own other political conversation. How are we going to garner a lot of support for $10 million of federal funds to support liberal causes, if you want to put it in political context in our state. So, for me, I'm trying to, I would like, from my seat, avoid the political conversation because it makes it harder to solve the science problem, right? What I hope is that whatever plan rolls out understands that just throwing money at a problem isn't going to do anything. That people have spent a lot of time creating strategies that have proven impactful. And I think I can't say this enough. It is a powder keg. Infectious disease, HIV, and Hep C, the elimination of a lot of those services that have kept a cap on these issues for several years. If you remove, that little bit of service, if you remove it for those high-risk communities, you're looking at Scott County, Indiana, all over again. So we want to avoid that. Those of us that do this work understand that little bit of safety net, that we have a hard time funding in Tennessee, especially, right? But just that little bit that we have managed to create and weave together through these funding sources and leveraging federal dollars. All the providers have been very creative and filling the gap where we hope there was something bolder and broader. So when you start chipping away at what we've done, the whole thing just sort of falls down, and we don't want that to happen. And it's real simple to fix. I mean, it's what I would say is, let's speak generally here. In any executive branch, whether it be a president, governor, mayor, typically when they come into office, those departments that have functioned for decades with good leadership, educated leaders in those fields, most executives say, I'm going to trust the civil servants here that are doing this work and have been doing it for a long time and trust their expertise, whether I agree with it or don't agree with it politically. I trust that they have implemented these services effectively and are utilizing and spending those dollars to be most impactful. In this case, there's been what I would say overreach into, we want to put our hands in this because it sort of touches our political agenda. And that's really unfortunate because I don't think anybody here is a bad person. I think maybe just a little misguided and maybe not looking at long-term what the true impact could be and what potential health crisis this little bit of act that it looks very minor could potentially create.
Yeah, these programs that you that the CDC money funds are primarily preventative programs, and so that's with needle exchange and things like that. Um, that could have like you said, a ripple effect down the line, couldn't it? Because if there is an increase in the number of people from these high at risk groups who contract HIV, that means that the treatment side of your operation is going to be further burdened. Is that fair? Is that correct?
That is fair. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I just attended a forum a couple weeks ago up in at ETSU, an opioid forum that had a lot of local representatives. I think it was the city county mayor, the police chief, sheriff. Look, everybody in that room, regardless of their political persuasion, said we are in a crisis. Our communities in Appalachia are in an absolute crisis when it comes to opioid use and spread of infectious disease and needle sharing related to opioid use. Everybody recognizes it's a crisis. This is the time when public health, public servants, whether you're a senator, a representative, a governor, should be looking for solutions, using resources that already exist that are effective as models and building on that, not destroying it. So, it just seems so counterintuitive from someone in my seat. And I think from a lot of local public officials who are fighting this on the ground. The sheriff up in Washington County said, look, my jail is 90% opioid users, right? It's crimes related too. So again, I think there's a lot of good people in this state that have a voice in our government and our public processes. And I hope they all come together and collectively find a solution, not just for this issue. Like this is big and it's unfortunate and it is self-imposed crisis, right? We have real crises that we should be looking at to solve and using resources, federal and state, to be impactful and make real change.
So I guess maybe last question, just what happens now? I mean, this was a gubernatorial decision. It didn't need legislative approval, but presumably the legislature could express their own wishes about it if they want to. Are you and other advocates working to try to reverse the governor's decision? Are you working to try to ensure that whatever replaces it is actually adequate? Kind of where's the focus?
Yeah, and there's two answers here. On the state level, it's hard to answer because there's really been no description of what he intends to do, what he intends to replace, what he intends to fund, how he intends to fund it. Is this going to be a public proposal process where agencies can apply? Is this going to be money that goes directly to people that the government has chosen? How's this roll out? The three target populations he has defined: sex traffic victims, first responders, and babies that are born to mothers with HIV. Look, I mean, the best way to protect all of those people is to have testing and services available and keep people virally suppressed. I mean, those are already sort of grouped in. And look, there's a risk, of course, but when you look at risk and transmission and how to manage it, it's hard to look at that and say, pulling out all these monies that have been created, these programs have been created to target these really high risk communities to now serve, communities that are sort of touched by this crisis is confusing.
All right. Well, Steve Jenkins, Positively Living and the Choice Health Network, thank you so much for joining us. And we will certainly be continuing to cover this as it develops.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Steve Jenkins for talking with us. And of course, we will be following that issue along with several other issues as they work their way through the legislature. Okay, we are to the Q&A, question and answer part of the podcast. Every week we go on to Compass Colloquy, which is our subscriber-only Facebook page. One of many benefits of being a Compass subscriber. If you are not a Compass subscriber, you can learn more about those at CompassKnox.com. Anyway, we go on to the Compass Colloquy Facebook page and we say, hey folks, is there anything you would like to hear about on the podcast this week? And we got an interesting question from a reader wanting to know if there, and this question may have been prompted by some of the recent development news that we've had, but if there are any height restrictions on how tall you can build a building in Knoxville. Scott, are there?
Yes, for the most part. The most zones in the city have maximum height restrictions on them. In residential areas, it's 35 feet. Basically, you can have a 3-story house, and that's it. Of course, zones that allow multifamily houses or apartment buildings essentially can go up 45 or more. Then you have commercial buildings. Most of those zones, well, they vary. The maximum height will vary in commercial zones from usually 45 feet, which is a 4-story building, and some don't have any restrictions. Some have a 90-foot limit. Some have a 45-foot limit or 75-foot limit. So it varies from zone to zone. And then you get to downtown, which has its own.
Which is where our tallest buildings are.
Our tallest
mostly.
buildings are, and for the most part, downtown there are no restrictions. You can, if you have the financial wherewithal to do so, you could build a full-size replica of the Empire State Building. If you have the financial means to do so, and enough tenants.
Right, yeah. People to put in it.
Yeah, but anyway, that's for most of downtown. Now, there are areas of downtown where that doesn't apply. There are parcels downtown that are identified as downtown historic. The Tennessee Theater is one. Mm-hmm. There are others, and the height restriction there, I believe, is 125 feet.
If you're within a certain, like adjacent to it or
no,
something?
No, if you're in it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you're next to it and you're, the zone is called DKH. So DKH, you can build up to 125 feet, but if you're next door and you're zone DKG, which is downtown grid, you have no restriction. Mm-hmm. So
you could build the Empire State Building next to the Tennessee Theater.
Yes, you could.
You just couldn't build it on the Tennessee Theater.
That is correct.
Gotcha.
That is correct. And then there are other areas. The area north of downtown, where Emory Place is, and the intersection of Broadway and Central is in the zoning world. That's downtown too, mm-hmm. and that has a lower height restriction. But there is a height restriction there. Now these limits can be exceeded mm-hmm. In certain circumstances. You have to get a variance for them. For instance, the form-based code along Cumberland Avenue that we have talked about, the big development that's mm-hmm. going in, the core civic development that's going in down there. It is a couple of those buildings. The height restrictions 8 stories.
Mm-hmm. Along Cumberland Avenue.
Along Cumberland Avenue. That's the limit. A couple of these buildings will be 10-story buildings. They had to get variances to allow them to do that. Mm-hmm. South Knoxville waterfront also has a form-based code. Same thing. They've got, they've got height limitations on it too. So the answer is yes, there are height restrictions for most of the city, most of the property in the city. And if you are interested in building a taller building, it would behoove you to actually go and read the zoning code first.
Yeah, for sure.
Or hire somebody who knows it backwards and forwards.
All right, I'm going to interrupt with the question here, fellas.
Okay.
We were talking about UT earlier and their expansion. If my understanding is UT doesn't have any of the rules that any of the city coding has. If they were to build, like the Mechanicsville property, you said they don't have to follow the Mechanicsville zone.
That is correct.
Proper. Mm-hmm. So UT can do whatever they want as long as it's theirs.
There are two types of entities that can do whatever they want to do. One's the state government, and that's the University of Tennessee.
Understood.
State government. The other is railroads. Railroads can do anything they want.
Well, and don't forget the federal government. The Tennessee Valley Authority also.
Yes, the federal government too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, railroads can. If a railroad wants your house, they're taking it, man.
You don't want to get in the way of the railroads, even in the 21st century.
All those laws are still in the books that date back to the 1800s when railroads were expanding all over the place. But yeah, they can. That's one reason that you can't force a railroad to fix those narrow overpasses and play. Like there's one on Blunt Avenue downtown. It's basically traffic goes down to one lane, and but the city can't force them to widen that because they're the railroad.
And it's why if you ever want to try to relocate a working railroad track, good luck.
Yeah.
So here's a trivia question. I think we can all probably guess what the two tallest buildings in Knoxville are, right? We've got our two bank towers right there, side by side on South Gay Street. What is the third tallest building in Knoxville?
The third tallest. I'm gonna throw one out there because I don't know.
Guess.
It's the UT student graduate student housing building just around Concord.
Ding, ding, ding! You are exactly right.
Wow!
I'm sure that building has a formal name of some kind, but I just call it the cereal box
Yeah.
because it looks to me like a giant cereal box. That is actually the third tallest. Now, the fourth tallest after it, I believe, is still the Andrew Johnson building.
Right.
Which when it was built in 1929 was the tallest building in Knoxville before all of these other buildings came along. But yeah, that one sort of weirdly isolated.
Yeah, out in the middle of nowhere. You talk about a tall building surrounded by a bunch of basically single family houses, or at least single level commercial.
Well, and that's a good illustration because I believe that was built by the university, and it's a good illustration of, the university not needing to fit in with the surrounding landscape in any way whatsoever.
That is true, and that is a good illustration.
So if anybody who's living up on the top stories there, I think are living in the highest, because the bank buildings don't have residences at the top. So people in that building, I believe, are actually the highest residences in the city.
Wow. Okay.
I don't remember where I came across that.
That is some mean trivia right there.
Right? Well, you got it right.
Well, the only reason I did is because your knee-jerk answer is Andrew Johnson.
Right. You just kind of go down the road there.
So I'm starting to say, okay, well, what buildings are tall? You rival those in height. And then I thought about that one because
that's the one.
But I didn't know if it's because it's so tall, or it is just so tall in relation to
everything around
all the low-lying buildings around it.
Yeah, well, it is both of those.
Well, I get a prize.
All right. Looking ahead to this coming week, we've got a bunch of action on the field. A lot of our government agencies are meeting. The school board is having its monthly meetings. Workshop Monday at 5 o'clock. Voting meeting Thursday at 5 o'clock. Both of those in the Summer Place boardroom. They don't have anything super dramatic seeming on the agendas. They're some school improvement things. Actually, the biggest item on the agenda is a $7 million fund balance transfer that they are using to buy textbooks, because this is how our school system buys textbooks. They treat them as sort of like an extraordinary expense because I think they're mostly buying math books this year. They do them on adoption cycles. And so instead of having that money kind of budgeted in the budget, they just kind of wait until they have sufficient fund balance and then go in and buy math books for the whole district, because it's not something they do every year. And then City Council is meeting on Tuesday, right?
Yeah, City Council meets Tuesday, 6 o'clock in the main assembly room of the City County building. The council does not have an exciting agenda this time. They got all that out of their system.
All the dog tethering.
Yeah, all the dog
no more dog ordinances.
No dog ordinances on the agenda for Tuesday. Couple of kind of interesting things when you cover these things, and there's nothing that's really earth-shattering. But these are kind of interesting things. Is they're letting out 3 contracts for 3 different companies to do traffic traffic signal maintenance over the next year. And the reason that they're doing 3 companies is so they can have them and rotate them through. So I'm assuming that if there's one emergency that comes up, company A goes in, the next one company B does, the next one company C does, they start over again. So it's kind of I've not seen.
Give them some redundancy, maybe?
Yeah,
or maybe if there's like a big emergency, they can call all of them.
Yeah, and I've seen, there are contracts that are divvied up, like for park mowing contracts. Or different companies will have be responsible for different parks or different areas of town. But they don't rotate, and so this one's a rotating thing. And the other is the other item that's on the agenda that was kind of interesting is the city is going to get the Tennessee Valley Authority to basically consult with them, to be a consulting firm on the Knoxville Area Transit's electric buses. So they're going to look at the bus infrastructure, the electric vehicle infrastructure, and and CAT is transitioning to an all electric fleet eventually, and so they're going to get TVA to consult with them and help them out on what kind of infrastructure they need, what identify problems they might have and that sort of thing. And one of the things that's really unusual for this is the consulting fee is $0.
Ah,
so TVA is doing it for free.
Nice.
It's actually TVA is actually doing this across the valley for municipalities that want to.
Well, TVA is, unless I'm wrong, in the electricity generation and distribution business, and so maybe encouraging more electric buses is in their own corporate interest.
It would appear so. Yes.
All right, and then Thursday, the Planning Commission's meeting.
Planning Commission is meeting Thursday at 1:30, also in the main assembly room of the City County building. That's the place if you are a big fan of rezoning property or a big opponent of rezoning property. It's your party, and so they'll have plenty of those. We'll be doing plans. One thing that is coming up is one of those planned developments that we talked about. Galbraith School in South Knoxville is being turned into. It's an old school. It's been empty for years in a pretty nice looking old historic building, and it's going to be turned into an apartment complex. There will be some new construction there, but they, instead of rezoning the property, they just did the plan development process, and that plan is coming before the Planning Commission on Thursday. And another item on the agenda that kind of dovetails with what we were talking about on Building Heights, the Ephant Group, which has been buying up property downtown in the last couple of years, and we've written a little bit about their moves. They own the big empty gap next to the Century Building on Gay Street, 308 South Gay Street.
Sort of just south of Summit Hill there.
Yeah, just south of Summit Hill. In fact, it's one lot from Summit Hill, and they have plans to redevelop it. That property is zoned DKH, which, as we said earlier, was for historic properties and has a 125-foot cap on how tall a building can be. But they're wanting to change it to the grid designation, which doesn't have height restrictions at all. So we don't know exactly what their plans are. They have talked about, I believe it's going to be a boutique hotel, but it'll be a residence of some sort. But don't know. They haven't talked about, how tall it's going to be and things like that. But apparently they're getting it rezoned, so maybe we'll find out what the plans are for it here soon.
All right. Well, anything interesting that happens at any of those meetings, we will be back here next week to talk about. For now, my rum is almost gone, and I don't want to ask Seth for a second round because that seems like it would be excessive for all of us. So we will just say thanks a lot. Thank you to Seth, of course, for the production work. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will see you back here next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.